There is a medieval history of the monarchy that is highly significant that I want to share with you, that will play a role with the monarchy in the future, and whoever Israel sets as their king upon the throne, as their anointed one. And I've talked all about everything dealing with King Charles III and all of that. But today I want to tell you a little bit of the history of some of the family line of Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles III, and the Queen Mother, as well as some of the other royals. Now, this is really interesting because back in the Middle Ages, the Boleyn family were aristocrats. And the way that they gained power to move up the ranks, to get and weave their way in to finally being in the monarchy, was completely by manipulation and through having affairs with the king. At the time, King Henry VIII was married to Catherine of Aragon of Spain. Catherine of Aragon's husband, the brother of the king, had died, and so King Henry VIII took her as his wife, and for that reason he was eventually dissatisfied with Catherine of Aragon, since she was not producing a male heir, and that she really wasn't the love of his life because she had previously been married, and he took her as his wife. So this started a whole series of situations, including the Cardinal Wolsey that was controlling things for the Pope with the monarchy and the king. And so he had a seal that he would sign off on documents. He had power of the Pope, and really Rome was ruling all that time up until these events took place. Now, as soon as Henry being invited to the wedding of Mary Boleyn, the Boleyn family tried to weave their way into the monarchy, moving in their aristocracy up the ladder until they actually penetrated the king's court, and eventually Queen Anne Boleyn sat on the throne as Henry's queen. But the older sister, Mary, had a wedding and she got married, and soon after she got married, she started having an affair with King Henry VIII. And so Mary became the mistress of King Henry VIII. And for a long time, she was in bed with the king. And things were being manipulated by the Boleyn family, Thomas Boleyn and the father. And he was trying to get his family's name into the monarchy. Catherine of Aragon was first married to Henry VIII's older brother named Arthur. And Arthur was the Prince of Wales. And so Catherine of Aragon was married to him for a short time, and she was the Princess of Wales. So after Arthur died, the brother, Henry VIII, married Catherine of Aragon. And he really wasn't totally in love with her. He claimed he had a favorite wife later on, Jane Seymour. So let's get to the crux of all of this, because the Boleyn family, there were two daughters. One was named Mary. She was the older daughter. And then Anne Boleyn. A lot of you know her history. And she died by the sword because of eventual things that took place with the king. So here's the thing. Mary Boleyn, the older daughter, was having an affair with Henry VIII while he was married to Catherine of Aragon. And so they say that Mary Boleyn, she married this William Carey, and she had 2 children, but it was during the time that she was sleeping with King Henry VIII. And so it's always been rumored that the 2 children, one was a daughter named Catherine, and the other one was a son named Henry. And these 2 had the name Carey. However, King Henry VIII disclaimed that they were his legitimate children, and he had a legitimate child that was Edward VI. So trying to keep all of this straight is really kind of interesting. But these 2 kids of Mary Boleyn are supposedly direct ancestors of Queen Elizabeth II and King Charles III and the Queen Mother. Mary had affairs with the king for quite a few years. Catherine of Aragon was the daughter of King Ferdinand II in Spain and Queen Isabella of Castile. Now, she married King Henry VIII's older brother, and he died soon after. So Henry VIII, the brother, married her, and she tried to have children. She gave birth to about 6 children, and only one of them really lived. So the one son that they had died soon after he was born. But her daughter was Mary Tudor, who was called Bloody Mary, who became the Queen of England. Now, she was rivals with the Boleyn family. So the Boleyn family, there were 2 daughters, Mary Boleyn and Anne Boleyn. And Anne was Catherine of Aragon's lady-in-waiting in the king's court. Mary Boleyn, who was having the affair as the mistress of King Henry VIII, her husband, William Carey, got this sweating sickness and died not too long after that. And then Mary, while she was having the affair with King Henry VIII and being his mistress, she remarried somebody of lower stature who was like a soldier. His name was Stafford, last name, and he was considered to be too far beneath her. So this angered Mary's sister Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, and they both had Mary banished from the king's court. All of this time, the father and relatives of Mary and Anne Boleyn were manipulating the whole royal system to try to work their way in and weave a way up to the monarchy. It was such intense manipulation of the king. The Boleyns were manipulating over and over and over again. And one of the ways that after Mary was banished from the king's court and Henry VIII stopped using her as his mistress, but she had sired 2 children, Catherine and Henry, who are really believed to have been his children that he denied. Okay, well, Henry turned his attention on Mary's sister, Anne Boleyn. And he started having an affair with Anne Boleyn while he's still married to Catherine of Aragon. And as the story goes, Anne Boleyn started being the mistress of Henry VIII. So her sister had been the mistress, and now she was bumped out of the king's court, no longer the mistress, and now her sister Anne became the mistress. So she's having this big affair with King Henry VIII, and she's sleeping in his bed while the king is still married to Catherine of Aragon. And he had been married to Catherine for something like 24 years. And at the time, Rome had control over the British monarchy. Pope Clement VII was asked to give King Henry an annulment from Catherine of Aragon, but the Pope refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And so this made Anne Boleyn more and more angry and more determined to remove Rome as the religious hierarchy. The Pope gave Cardinal Wolsey the seal of the Pope. So Rome was really controlling the British monarchy and manipulating kings and queens and who they married and who they were allowed to get an annulment from if they wanted to get divorced. Henry wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon, and Anne became more and more belligerent about wanting to get rid of Catherine of Aragon. And so she tried to manipulate the situation to have Cardinal Wolsey taken from power of the Pope of Rome to working and manipulating until she told the king, you have the power, not the Pope. So you should get rid of Cardinal Wolsey, who has all of this power of the Pope, and you, as king, can become the supreme head of the Church of England. So Anne Boleyn kept working the manipulation until she actually got the king to get rid of the Pope, and so that the Pope in Rome had no more power over the monarchy in England. And the king took power as the supreme head of the Church of England. And that meant that the king had the power to appoint the high-ranking pastors or the archbishop, whatever. He puts all of the clergy, in high-ranking clergy, in their place of power. And so it was this manipulation of Anne Boleyn to remove the Pope from power that got Henry to be the supreme head of the Church of England. And the king had total control at that point. The Pope no longer had control. Rome no longer had control. From that time on, we had the monarchs that descended from these people, and King Charles III is currently the supreme head of the Church of England, and he is the one who's responsible for placing the clergy in their positions. Now, I told you, if Israel makes the king over them as the anointed one, who was anointed with the Jerusalem olive oil, the olives came from the Mount of Olives, and they were pressed in Bethlehem, which is basically the seat of King David's ancestry. So this was very significant that King Charles III, who claims through Queen Victoria that to be a descendant of King David and all of that, he would have power if Israel went under the Commonwealth and he became the king. They would see him as the anointed one. And they have talked about doing this as not just speculation. They actually have a group in Israel working on that with the Commonwealth. So this is extremely significant. Now, I told you that when it says that one of the beast's deadly head wounds was healed, I told you that was referring to the king of Judah. And at that time, the king of Judah would have been the supreme head of the religious part, not only the political part of the monarchy, but also the religious part. He would have been the head of state and the head of the religious system in Israel. So this is the head wound, and it is healed in the last days when the Sanhedrin, that has the Antichrist spirit, the anti-Jesus spirit, Yeshua, they want to put a king on the throne again, and this is how it would happen. So that deadly head wound of Judah would be healed, that deadly wound healed, by setting a monarch on the throne of Judah once again after a couple of thousand years of not having a king. And Boleyn managed to completely manipulate the king into getting rid of Roman Catholicism, having power over England's monarchy. And so ever since then, we had Catherine of Aragon's surviving daughter, Mary, and she became what was known as Bloody Mary. She was Catholic, and she persecuted Protestants. She had a lot of them, go to the execution, and this is what finally wound up happening to her. After they managed to get rid of the Catholic Church of Rome having control with the Pope, because he refused to give Henry a divorce from Catherine of Aragon so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. Well, he was already in the sack with Anne Boleyn for quite a while, and she was his mistress. And so Anne got more and more, hostile towards Catherine of Aragon, until Henry took the matters in his own hands and divorced her so that she was no longer queen. And he claimed with the Pope that he would, have the right of an annulment because Catherine of Aragon had been his brother's wife, who he married after his brother died. So it's all of this web of affairs and manipulations and control, and then the king finally becoming the supreme head of the religious part of the monarchy. And that's what the king is today. So that's why the king would have the power to put the clergy, if he did become the king, over Israel through the Commonwealth, he would have the power to appoint the Sanhedrin members of the religious element of Judaism in power. So they would have power as kings. They're known as nasi, which is princes. And they would have power as kings with the king for 1 hour whenever they, proclaim that he's their king or whatever, and that they give him a crown. This is when I realized, when the Holy Spirit told me, look at the crown that is given to the white horse rider. All of a sudden, oh my word, hit me. It's the Antichrist, anti-Jesus, anti-Yeshua group that wants to give this king a crown as a gift. And King Charles III literally has a white horse that rides out with the trumpeter sitting on the back of the horse, and he blows the trumpet to let you know that the king has arrived. When this happens in Israel and they gift this king the crown, the horses go in succession and start stampeding forward. And in my research, I discovered that a bow is actually to travail as if giving birth. And we know that Israel will be in the time of travail, and this gifting of the crown to this king that is not the eternal heir. King Jesus is the eternal heir, but they will replace him with another king on the throne of Judah, and this gifting of the crown and the Torah scroll will make the white horse rider ride, and then the other horses follow. And so when that happens, that's the opening of the first seal. And then the next horse is the next seal. And I explained in separate videos each one of the horses there. Stunning revelations that I shared on my channel when the Lord revealed them to me. And since the king of Judah was taken away to Babylon with his eyes blinded, he was the last king of Judah sitting on the throne. And so the monarchy received a deadly wound in the head because the king was the supreme religious ruler, the religious part and the political part of the monarchy. And when this new Sanhedrin appoints the king, this is when everything is going to take off and the horses take out of the gate. So what eventually did happen is that Anne Boleyn kept trying to have an heir for King Henry VIII. Anne gave birth to a daughter for Henry. And Anne Boleyn's daughter was Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I, her line was cut off because she never had children. After a while, Henry was thoroughly disgusted with Anne, and he started having another mistress after her, another wife that he would soon marry. But in order to get rid of Anne, well, this whole turmoil began because Anne was accused of having relations with her own brother, George Boleyn, and she was accused of having 4 other lovers, including a musician in the court, and all of them were executed, along with Anne Boleyn. Henry sent for a swordsman, and that is how she lost her life. Interestingly enough, it was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Queen Elizabeth I, that signed the death warrant of Mary Tudor, and Mary was the one who was persecuting the Protestants and having them executed, which is eventually what her fate was. Mary managed to have one child who became King James, and King James is the one who had the King James Bible created through all of these scholars that were compiled together to read the original Hebrew and to make and create the King James Bible. Mary was a devout Catholic, and she never would change her faith from being a Catholic to a Protestant. She said she would die a Catholic, and she certainly had a horrible death. Because Anne Boleyn manipulated to have Wolsey removed, who had the power of the Pope and Rome, and the king took the supreme headship of the religious part of the monarchy into his own hands. This caused Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth I, to be upholding the Protestant part of religion, while Mary Tudor was a devout Catholic. And so Elizabeth I signed off on Mary's execution. Now here's the interesting thing. All of these affairs were going on with Anne Boleyn's sister first, with King Henry VIII. Mary Boleyn was a mistress while she was married to William Carey. She was romping around with King Henry VIII, sleeping in his bed, being his mistress, a scarlet harlot. Well, would you believe that Queen Elizabeth II, the Queen Mother, and King Charles III are all direct descendants of Mary Boleyn? So Mary Boleyn is the 12th great-grandmother of Queen Elizabeth II. She has no direct link to Anne Boleyn, who, died by the sword at the Tower of London. But Queen Anne's sister Mary is her 12th great-grandmother. And as we've been talking about the red heifer and all of the ceremony with that, and what I was revealing about the scarlet-colored beast and everything, it's truly interesting that when I was looking at the Boleyn family heraldry, there's 3 bulls on their shield. Anne Boleyn had given King Henry VIII William Tyndale's book, Obedience of the Christian Man. And that is what persuaded the king. William Tyndale was burned at the stake. He was strangled with a rope, burned at the stake in Brussels as a heretic because he was denouncing the Pope and trying to bring the truth of the Bible to the world. And so he paid the ultimate price for it. But Anne Boleyn gave the king a copy of William Tyndale's book, and that changed everything, so that the monarchy was from then on not controlled by Rome, but by the king himself as the supreme head. So I told you that Mary Boleyn had these two children, Catherine and Henry. And this is who the queen is descended from, Catherine, who some say was a child of King Henry VIII that was not accepted by Henry as his child. So the queen is descended from her, Catherine. And would you believe that Princess Diana, that Catherine Carey, which is Mary Boleyn's daughter, was Princess Diana's 13th great-grandmother. So they're all connected to Mary Boleyn, the sister of Anne Boleyn. And then King Charles III is a direct descendant of Mary Boleyn through her daughter, Catherine Carey, and this is the same ancestor of the 13th great-grandmother of Princess Diana. So technically, they're all related to Mary Boleyn. And not only that, but would you believe that Kate Middleton is a direct descendant of Mary Boleyn's daughter, Catherine Carey, as well? So that means they're all related. Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles III, Princess Diana, and Kate Middleton. And get this, Camilla Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla, consort, that's married to King Charles III, she is a descendant of Anne Boleyn. She's a first cousin 14 times removed of Anne Boleyn. Because of the fact that Anne Boleyn was considered by some to be an illegitimate wife of Henry VIII, because of the fact that while he married her, he was still married to Catherine of Aragon and was trying to divorce her and trying to use the Pope to get an annulment from her, and he was married to Anne Boleyn, and she gave birth to Elizabeth I. Mary, Queen of Scots, she did not see either Anne or her daughter Elizabeth I as legitimate monarchs sitting on the throne. When Mary came back from Scotland, she was railed on by John Knox, a Calvinist preacher who was Protestant, and tried to get her to see the truth about the Roman Catholic Church, but she would have none of it. So she died a horrible death, and there were all kinds of accusations of other affairs and, backstabbing the Queen, Elizabeth I, and all of this was due to all of these mistresses having all of these affairs and romping around with kings. And even Mary Boleyn was said to not only be sleeping with Henry VIII, but she had come over from France and she was sleeping with Francis I, the King of France. So she was sleeping with two kings. The Boleyn family was very manipulative and trying to get in the work their way up the ladder to become part of the monarchy, which they eventually did, which ultimately changed Rome having control over the religious aspect of the monarchy in England and consequently other places like Scotland and, Ireland and Wales. So this is really extraordinary history. Would you believe that Harry and Meghan are related already? They're 11th cousins once removed. And that makes Prince William a distant nephew of Anne Boleyn, but he's descended through Mary Boleyn's daughter, Catherine, as well as his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, and his father, Charles III. Meghan Markle is a descendant of Henry VIII's third wife, Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour was a second cousin to Isabel Hildyard, which is Meghan Markle's 12th great-grandmother. Harry and Meghan were married in the place, St. George's Chapel, where Jane Seymour is buried. So that cannot be by coincidence they chose that chapel, because she's descended from Henry VIII's third wife, and this was after Anne Boleyn was executed, and she became the next wife. So by then, Henry was sleeping around with all of these women in the Boleyn clan, and then continued to marry until he was dissatisfied with that wife, and several of the wives were executed, as you know. And so it was just really a horrible time in the Middle Ages to be part of the British monarchy. I truly find it interesting with all the intrigue and all of the affairs and mistresses and romping around that went on, that the current monarchy is direct descendant from Henry VIII's mistress. So, totally stunning, don't you think? And to this day, the king is the supreme head of the Church of England, and this gives him power to appoint the clergy, as I have said. And how will this play a role in the future if, as Queen Victoria thought, she was descended from King David's line? Now, I'm sure there are a lot of King David's descendants that are living that people have no idea they're related to King David. He had lots of brothers, and we don't know if he had sisters or not. Doesn't mention any. But there was, he came from a huge family, so there's bound to be descendants of King David. There are, of course, other royal links and lines that I'm not going to cover today, so you'll understand if I'm not putting all of that in here too. The events that took place back then prepared the way for what is coming in the time of Jacob's trouble, because Israel is going to, I should say, the Sanhedrin. Now, I was listening to Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz again, talking about the red heifer ceremony and all of that, and he said that they'll do it whenever they decide to, and it has nothing to do, of course, with building the temple according to him. But he did say that the Temple Institute is the final authority on the issue. And I would actually say that the Lord God of Israel is the final say and the final authority on the issue. So this is really interesting. He said that the vast majority of Jews, just like I've told you, are not interested in a temple. Some of the Haredi Jews, some of the people with the black hats and all, they're not interested in a temple. They're trying to get an idea of how, at this Red Heifer Convention, to convince more Jews to come on board with sacrificing this red heifer. And Adam said that it's going to cause division within the Jewish community, because a lot of people are really happy just worshiping in their synagogues the way that their grandfathers did, and they don't want to go back to some ancient ceremony that is now obsolete because the Messiah fulfilled all righteousness and is the only blood covenant that can ever take away your impurity and make you in a state of righteousness under the King of Kings' blood, so that you are forgiven of your sins and you're cleansed and purified. So the royal family has come a long way since those days, but the King of England remains the supreme head of the Church of England since 1558. And all of those events took place because the Boleyn family wove their way into the monarchy until Anne became queen, and the two sisters being mistresses of Henry VIII. I hope you enjoyed hearing this history, and you can see how it will play a role in the future.